Alright, so I'm driving from Seattle down to Portland. Thought I'd do a little video cast here of my eventful days up at the Seeds of Compassion event. It was a massive effort. It was a 5-day event centering around the Dalai Lama and centering around ways that people could form patterns, habits, and actions of compassion. So each of the 5 days had an emphasis to them. There was a day on science, as I understand. There was a day on education, a day on young people. So it was ways that cities could develop compassion. A very big deal in the city of Seattle. All along the city streets, there's banners, those kind of parade banners that hang off of lampposts and so on with the Dalai Lama on it. Welcomed by the city of Seattle. 150,000 people participated in these events over the 5 days. So, there were musicians like the Dave Matthews Band did a concert, and other people. Just really big deal. You can tell really some people who had influence and voice in the Seattle community were involved in this thing. Everything was free. They raised $7 million for this event, and apparently started planning on this sometime late last fall. So in 5 or 6 months, I guess, they put together this event, and it was just a massive undertaking. Well, the event that I was a part of yesterday was the Interfaith Spirituality Day, and it was a fascinating day. There were panels, as they did for all the other days as well, and so there were 2 of them. Rob Bell and I were the 2 representatives of kind of evangelical Christianity, which we don't, use that as a self-define or anything, but for the folks running this event, they would clearly see us as participants in what they would see as some hopeful expressions of dialogue that could happen with people from sort of the mainstream and kind of typical evangelical expression of Christianity in the country. And it was really humbling and shocking, actually, that other voices of those traditions weren't involved in this event. And I'm not sure about how the choosing went, but really surprising that more people from the evangelical community weren't involved in this event. Because I just think that it's, I would think that people who are sort of Jesus-following, people following the biblical narrative wouldn't have anything to fear in being involved in cooperating with people who are doing works of compassion and goodness and generous spirituality in the world. So it's so interesting to me that those folks weren't involved. But the day was just an extreme honor. We started out early in the morning with a 300-person prayer breakfast, and the panelists for that day then were sitting in the front table. So I sat right at the feet away from the small little stage that had the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu on it. And I'll tell you, these 2 guys represent in their traditions an archbishop and then the Dalai Lama, which to Buddhists would be sort of a manifestation of the reincarnated Lama and Dalai Lama, and really an expression of significant spiritual leadership of incarnation, God dwelling here. And so just to be that close was so interesting, and I kept thinking about all the people for whom they would spend a lifetime wanting to journey to be that close to the Dalai Lama. People would sort of very comfortably and so on, but they'd bring up scarves to have him touch, and they kind of work in that whole holy man way. And what was so interesting about the interaction when they came in, first off, was just how joyful these Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama are, how normal they are, and how they're kind of deconstructing all the power that goes around those positions. It was so interesting because they, like the Dalai Lama comes in, I could tell on his arm, I guess it was his right arm that sort of sits open, his sleeve sits over. He had these 4 big bruises on his arm, and just so interesting that this revered, special, ontologically distinct person in that Buddhist faith is just so normal and human. And there's just so much to learn about the Christian story and how we should be thinking about humanity and about God and about Jesus in this model. It's just just so intriguing. And I was taken by the shoes that he was wearing, and literally, I mean, it was just, I could see it just 5 feet away. So he's hiking his socks up, his little red socks, and just so normal. And they sit down and they're giggling, the two of them. They just such affection for each other. They've been friends for a long time, and they're just sort of giggling and having fun. It's a bit of a shtick, there's no question about it. But I'll tell you, watching these guys deconstruct the celebrity religious person was really, really important. And I think there's so much to learn by people from the traditions that I hang around with and come from about deconstructing the celebrity pastor world that could be learned from these guys. I mean, this is kind of the deal that Desmond Tutu does, apparently, because he did it both at the prayer breakfast and then later, a few hours later, at the big panel. But they sat down, and he was sort of saying, you know, it's such an honor to be with his friend, the Dalai Lama, and the work that they do together and bring about compassion and justice and peace in the world. And, you know, he said it's a wonder to him how someone who could be exiled from his community, be under such threat, because he's, you know, having to live outside of Tibet, caring for the Tibetans and all of this as a head of state, and being exiled for these 50 years, but how he's just bubbling with enthusiasm and joy. And he said, this is a little bit, he said sometimes, and he said, but he's also quite mischievous, and he says it in this cute little South African accent, and he said, sometimes I have to say to him, Dalai Lama, be careful, the cameras are on us, you have to act like a holy man now. And then they would just laugh, and they just know. And Desmond Tutu is so genius at his fast laugh, his simple way of saying things, and then deconstructing all the power that he has. He received a shirt a couple of years ago, apparently, from someone that said, had printed on it, "Just call me Arch." So people referred to him as Arch. So that's what he wants folks to call him. So Arch would say, you know, for the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So he's having fun with that. And he refers to the robe that he wears, the covering, he calls it his costume. So he recognizes that he's playing a part in a whole system and power structure. And while people like me want to, you know, obviously go the next step further and say, let's remove these systems and structures that are part of religious systems of separation, that separate the laity from the clergy, that separate one faith from another, and let's find some new ways to orient. That's not what he can do, obviously. He's not chosen to do that in his position. But what he's doing is also humanizing and deconstructing all the pattern that goes around this. And there was the same thing I saw from the Dalai Lama. Just a really brilliant and humble and person who just exudes this kind of warm essence. But then at the same time, he has an entire entourage that comes in with him, and people who screen for him, people protect him. And I was struck sitting there watching these two men who are absolutely committed to nonviolence and to trying to use conversation and agreement and laughter and understanding as the way that you change systems and structures, both in South Africa and in Tibet and around the world, and interpersonally, and how they're both deeply disciplined and connected guys to their faith traditions, well, even though the faith traditions are so different. But then I was struck by how they're committed to nonviolence, but they're flanked on both sides of the stage by Secret Service agents, because the Dalai Lama is a head of state for the government of Tibet, an exiled government. And so apparently the United States government provides Secret Service, and we all had to be screened before we came and provide documentation and so on to even be in the room with him, or to be within 50 feet, be in the prayer breakfast room, or to be within 50 or 100 feet of him, which we were. And so, but he's flanked by these Secret Service agents who were in their full, you know, suits and earpieces, and when the Secret Service agent came walking by, I could see in his back that he had, you know, his weapons. And so I was just taken by how here are these two guys who are absolutely committed to nonviolence, but the only way that that commitment can be maintained is under the protection of people who would have to use force to keep you from hurting them. And so living in that tension, that in order to protect the approach of nonviolence, there has to be the use of force to keep them safe.